Welcome to the part 11 of our remake of the shoot 'em up. The original one from KidsCanCode is now on its final episode here. We've got this one and one more with a leaderboard screen, but the code for this is now up on my repository here. I'll put that link in the description. Today we're doing it in C# with Monogame, so let's get that up and running. So what we've got this time is a menu. So when we start the game off, instead of it going straight into the game, we've got this menu screen. This will reappear once we've lost all 3 lives, and then you can just start over again. So it won't actually stop working until you physically shut the game down or press escape. Now we've got this press B to toggle background music, which is convenient. So if I press B, background music stops and starts. There's a hidden key here which doesn't show anything on, it's not kind of mentioned on the screen. If you press X, you go into debug mode, so that again allows you to check things out just by turning it on and off as you please. And then finally press enter to begin. Of course it works as expected. I'm not going to bother to let myself die 3 times, but once it does, then we'll go back to the menu screen. So this is what it's all about. It's been heavily refactored to try and match with the Love2D and Pygame versions. So we'll go through the various classes in turn, starting with the bullet. Now, one thing I've changed here is that when we were doing this in Pygame, when I changed the bullet class, which I will just show you now, we put in these decorators here to get the properties of the rectangle and the circle, which is kind of the correct way of, once you've created an object from a class, you can read the properties of that class or that object using these decorators, which is the proper way of doing it. I haven't actually put any setters in here because we didn't need to set anything. So let me just get that out of the way. So in order to reproduce that in C#, C# has these what are called auto, I think they're auto properties or something like that, auto setters, whatever, where you just put them inside a couple of curly braces with the words get semicolon set semicolon. Now that doesn't quite work for some reason, because rectangle and circle F are themselves objects, and if you just put the auto setter get set, when you come to try and make any changes to the rectangle, it doesn't quite work, because it comes up with an error and says that it's not a variable. So a bit weird, but I've managed to get round that by doing these kind of halfway house, not quite an auto property, but a little bit more. So the way that's done is, initially I've created a private rectangle here and a private circle. Then I've set a public rectangle using the capital R, so the lowercase is for the private rectangle F, and this one has got a getter but not a setter, so this allows this to be read from all the other classes in the code here. Same with the circle, we've got a private circle with a lowercase c and then a public one. Now in the methods, let me just go to the constructor first. We make our rectangle lowercase a new rectangle F and give it all of the things here. Now this of course is the player rectangle, so it's got a capital R, and then we've got we're setting up our new rectangle for the bullet, and then we're assigning it here its X and Y left or right coordinates, depending whether we have chosen an alignment for the bullets to emanate from the center of the player, which is the default, or if you supply it with a left or a right, it'll then shoot the bullet off from the left or right of the player. So this now matches the Pygame and Love2D versions, and I'll just show you how that works in Shmup main. We'll go to the shoot. There we are. So in the shoot function in the main one here. So with the shoot function now, depending on whether the player's power is the default 1 or whether it's greater than that, we can now fire up a single bullet where we supply just the bullet image and the alignment of center, or we can supply a left and right. So when the player power is at 2, it fires off one to the left and one to the right at the same time as part of the power up. So let's come back to the bullet there. So that's now been changed in the constructor here, so that we can now create our rectangle and base its starting position on whether or not left or right has been, oops, I want to do that, Control Z, has been chosen. The circle as before, we've got a new circle, again lowercase now, so that it's returned as a getter in its uppercase version. Speed is set to 1000, and then if you want to, in debug mode, just reduce that to half, and active is set to true. This active is never actually accessed from outside the class, so anything that stays private within the class, I've just left it in lowercase, and of course they've been given the private thing. This is really what Python desperately needs, to get rid of all this nonsense with underscores and double underscores and things like that, but there you go. Learn C# and use that instead, it's far better. Right, so we've now got our update, where we're updating the speed. Actually, I've just noticed there I've used the capital rectangle. It doesn't matter, because what that's referring to is it will now go straight to this version here where I've got the capital R, and you'll see that it's got 9 references, and if we list them, those references are actually within, with the exception of the one who's in the main folder here, the rest are internal. So what we can do, if we go down to here and change that to the lowercase rectangle, and the same with that one, and the same with that one. Oops, helps if you put it in with an R, and then this one, lowercase, and this one, lowercase. That's probably covered most of them. Let's go back up to here, and it now says we've got 4 references, which is on lines 42 and 43. Again, you see, using C# and Visual Studio, you've got this phenomenal abilities to see where everything is in different files, what they consist of. You know, this would be absolutely marvelous if you could do that in Python. But anyway, so let's change those lines that we just saw. Yeah, here we go. Look, so we've got lowercase r there. As I say, this worked perfectly before, because the lowercase rectangle is the kind of built-in one, but every time we used the capital R rectangle, it would go through this this public interface here to get this, so it kind of skips that step just by putting it in. Now we're down to 1 reference, which of course is in Shmup main on line 123, destroy equals bullets 1 rectangle intersects. Okay, so that's got that sorted. So that's our bullet class. The update is the same as it was before, draw is the same before. You'll notice I've used a lot of these region things. This is a Visual Studio thing, and it's really great because you can kind of shut off whole regions of code so that it all looks really neat. So that's the bullets dealt with. Let me just save that and we'll close that. Next we've got let's see, explosions. Now again, this is a full class, so I've done something similar here. Now the explosion doesn't actually have anything outside of the class that accesses it. We're not checking for collisions, so we don't need the rectangles, we don't need circles, we don't need anything. So all of these all of these are private variables. The constructor is the same as it was before. So again, I'm kind of following the idea that if the variables are used only within the class themselves, I'm putting them all in lowercase, whereas if they're going to be used outside the class, then I'll put them with an uppercase starting letter, so that when you're using the dot notation, so for example on this center.x, then you would have that that capital letter to remind you that it's a property. I suppose I could have renamed the images one here with a lowercase. Let's do that just to show you how that. So we do rename. It says it will change 5 references in one file. It's highlighted them all, so I'm just going to change that to a lowercase I just to really fit in, and then we press apply and they're all done. So we've now changed the list of images into lowercase just to keep it the same all through. So again, in the explosions class there's no real changes apart from just tidying it up, making sure everything's where you expect it to be. So that's as it was before. Let's close that. Now the menu, this is the new class that we have just created, so we'll get this one up and running. Now this again is a static class because we only need one menu, and you'll notice that although I've got an update method here, there's actually nothing in it. We'll come back to that in a second, but the menu here draws all the strings that you saw when I started it. So if I just hit the start button again, so this is our menu coming up. So each of these lines 16 to 20 is drawing the pieces of text on the screen here. So you've got the first one, shmup, where we're drawing the text that is passed into the draw function here. So I passed in that, so it's drawing that text. That's the size I've chosen, the position X, Y, and the color yellow, and we're drawing it in the center there. So that's drawing that, and then the only other one that's slightly different is the line 20, where we've got this shared green to give us the B to toggle the background music. So the menu class is actually very simple. Now you might be wondering, okay, how do we handle then the text, because it quite clearly says here press enter or press B, and we know it works. So how is that being interpreted? Now it says up here the text input handle object in shmup main is used to handle keystrokes. Now this is a way that every game library has its own method of dealing with text input. The Love2D one used I don't know if I've got that one available. Let me just check. Yes, I believe it does. Yeah, this love.keyPressed. So Love2D, just increase that, has this built-in function to the library that allows you to get access to whatever keys are pressed. So what I've done in the Love2D one was I've said, well, if the game state is menu, then we're going to check for the keys that have been pressed. So this one is what's called a callback function. In other words, when you press a key, it tells you a key has been pressed. It's not you asking the system, oh, what key's been pressed? You're told. It's like you're being called up by a phone system and it says, oh, somebody's just pressed the key. Right, okay, thank you. And then you can either deal with it or not as you please. So if we're in the menu game state, we're now looking for the key return, B, or X. So that's the way Love2D does it, by using a built-in function, love.keyPressed. Let me drop that out the way. Now in C#, we can kind of write our own event handlers, and that's done in the just find it, I think it's in the initialize. Yeah, here we go. So the initialize function is a protected override. In other words, it's inherited from game, which is the main this is the kind of the monogame structure behind all the scenes here. So we're inheriting this from game, and then we're overriding it so that we're able to add some extra stuff. And you'll notice down here, look, I've got this window.textInput plus equals text input handler. Now this is a C# way of adding an event handler. So to the text input on the window, which is a built-in part of game, we're adding a new handler, which is this function that we've written up here, which is in the events one, and there it is, the text input handler. So this entire function that I've written is being set up by the initialize method. So we're now got a brand new event handler which acts in exactly the same way as the Love2D keyPressed, love.keyPressed. So this is now going to interpret every time you press a key, you'll be able to get from it, from the sender and its arguments, the key that was actually pressed. So what this does is it finds out what key was pressed from the args here, and then the character that you actually pressed, in other words, is it the A or the B or the Z or whatever, it gets that character from a subset of args. So we're now getting the character of every key that we press. And again, we're checking, is the game state menu? Yes, it is. So you can see this is very similar now to the Love2D. Then we're checking, well, what was the pressed key? If it was enter, then we set the game state to play, reset the player, set the score to 0, and obviously with game state ready, set at play, 60th of a second later, that's going to start playing the game. If the key pressed was keys B, which is for the background music, it switches the Boolean value that's stored in shared called play music on or off, and then check, depending whether play music is set or unset, it will either play the background music or it'll stop playing it. So that's how the key input on the menu works. So the only reason for keeping this in at all is if we wanted maybe some graphics thing happening. So for example, when the menu was running, you could put some spaceship that floated across it, or some kind of graphic or other changes that did not rely on key presses, and then you could do that in the update and draw methods. So that's why I left the function in there, even though we're not using it. So that's the menu. Very, very simple. It's basically just drawing strings. And this brings me to the game states, which I could have briefly mentioned, but if you've watched the Love2D and Pygame versions of this episode 11, I will already have talked about it, but let's do it again in C#. So in our shared file here, right from the very start, we've had a dictionary of game states, where we've got menu is 1, play is 2, leaderboard is 3, and quit is 4. Now leaderboard we're not going to be using just yet, that's the next and final episode, but it doesn't matter. I may have left these in for the whole series, I can't remember, it doesn't matter. All we're checking for is while we're below quit, in other words below 4, then we do whatever we do. But this allows you to put multiple game states in. So at the moment we're using menu, play and quit. Leaderboard is for the next episode. And then when the game starts, which is in the load, if I can find that, I think it's in the not initialize, load content, there we go. And then it's setting the game state now to game states menu. So far they've all been set to game states play, and indeed if I change that now to play and we start it up, it's straight away in the play state. So it's as simple as that to allow you to have control. Let's just change that back to menu, of where your starting up is. And the way to deal with these is, that's obviously in the loading up one, is in the update and draw methods. Particularly you can check what is the game state. So up here I've got, if the game state is quit, then we exit. Simple as that. If the game state is menu, now again I did have an update thing in there which, as you know, doesn't do anything, and before I got to, let me delete that, we don't need it anymore. I was checking whether the background music was working, but I realized we could do it from the key input handler which I showed you a moment ago. So we're not really doing anything. You could delete this entire thing, but I'll leave it in case you wanted to add some kind of fancy graphics floating around. Then we've got else if the game state is play. So if it is play, then all the play stuff goes ahead. If it's menu, basically it does nothing in the update section, because there's nothing to update, because the key presses are handled independently by that text handler. Then the draw one, again, we've got if the game state is menu, then we're going to draw the menu draw sprite batch and then the shoot 'em up. So that's what gives us our yellow writing. So again, if I change that to, let's change it to game just for a laugh, and then we hit shmup, we've now got game. So that shows you how that works. Let me just change that back before I forget. So that in the main draw function in shmup main, it's now going to, in the menu, all we're doing is changing the menu. We're not dealing with anything else. Once we get onto the play game state, then it's going to go through, as it did before, all of these changes. We're updating all the explosions, the mobs, the bullets, drawing the lives, whatever we want to draw on the screen, and so on. And then finally, whatever the game state is, if we've got the debug version on, that's independent of the game states. This comes after this if then else selection. Then it's going to draw the string that says debug mode. So that's how the game states work. So shared we've looked at. The only thing I've added to the shared is this public static bool play music equals false. So because it's a public variable, I've put it with a capital letter so that we can use the dot syntax and know that we are expecting a property of a static class in there. So let's close the shared. Let's close the main. Yes, we want to save that. So menu, we're now gone over, we've finished with that. Let's go to the mob class. As you can see, by putting these regions in, it closes everything up by default, which is quite nice. Now the mob class has got a similar situation with the rectangles and circles. So under my properties region, I've got the same as I did in the bullets. We've got a lowercase rectangle private variable, a lowercase circle private variable, and then we've got the public rectangle in capital letters where we've got a getter. Again, we don't need a setter, and we're just returning the lowercase version of that variable. Then we've got the normal private variables in the class that we are using purely within the class. Then we've got the constructor where we're giving them all values, including of course our rectangle here, and our circle are being set up. And then we've got custom methods here, including one called reset, which is where the mob is reset once it has dropped off the bottom of the screen or has been hit by a bullet. We're setting the rectangle back to the somewhere near the top. We're resetting the speed. This is all what we've done before. I think I did call it something different. I think it was set properties. I've now put it as reset because that seems a more sensible name, and it's also what I used in the other two gaming engines, so it keeps everything consistent there. Rotate as much as it was before, then rotating vertices, update, draw, and so on. Again, we might just need to change. I notice we've got this rectangle with the capital R there. It doesn't really matter, either will do, but it just feels kind of better to put it in with the lowercase, because we're dealing directly with the internal variable, not the reference to it via that auto getter and setter. Let's just check if I've missed any. Yes, I've done it here, look. As I say, it works perfectly without, but as these are being dealt with internally, it does look better to use the lowercase version. There's another one here, look. Right, let's check what the thing up here says. So rectangle, it says we've got 12 references. Yeah, we've got 3 outside of this class in the shmup main on different lines there, where we're referring to the rectangle for various things here, but most of them are still internal, so I've obviously missed some of them. Let's start with line 47. I'm not going to go through them all at this point, but yeah, there we are. But you can see what I'm trying to do here. Right, so off screen I've gone through all of those references now, so that we've now only got for our rectangle external ones and for our circle external ones. So that's the mob class been redone. Otherwise I think that's working pretty much the same as it was before. Okay, let's save that, exit. So what's next? We've got the player class. Now in Python I changed the player from a static class back to a full dynamic class, because it was such a pain in Python to deal with all these global variables and non-global variables and other things. I think that's why people writing Python all the time don't bother with the idea of any kind of code module stroke static class, because it's just too much aggravation. But in C# I've left it as a static class, which works perfectly. And as before, we've got the public properties, which have been declared as public, so we know that we can get to them and change them, both read and write, which is perfectly acceptable in a static class. So you wouldn't normally use any kind of getters and setters in a static class. And of course everything that's public I've given a capital letter so that we know what is required and outside of the class. And the same, I've got this list of private class variables, which are the ones that we use internally but are not accessed from outside the class. And in fact, use of the word public and private actually prevents you in C#. You cannot read the scale of this class from outside it. It just won't let you. It can't even get past it, won't compile. So that's really great. It keeps everything where it's supposed to be. Set properties pretty much unchanged. I've maybe just tidied it up a little bit. With the circles and rectangles, because they're in a static class, I've just given them their capital R and capital C, and they are referred to as we go along. The reset function, I've just altered that slightly to again keep it in line with the Love2D and Pygame versions. The update, again, I've altered the power up timers and hide timers so that they are only adjusted if the power is greater than 1, or if the player is hidden, then it will update the timers and so on. And then there's a reset called after we've stopped hiding. Otherwise that's much the same as it was before, and so is draw, so that's the player. Power up, again we've got the rectangle and circle, we've now provided a couple of getters for them, and we're doing the internal rectangle circles there. Now you'll notice that the public rectangle, capital R, has got 0 references, so nothing is actually referring to it, whereas the circle has 1 reference, which is here in the shmup main. Now the reason for that is if we go to that line, we've got 2 options here. We can use either the poweruplist.circle intersects or poweruplist.rectangle intersects. So because this line is commented out, then this line has no references. But of course if we were to change that so that we're not using the circle but using the rectangle, then this would change. That would have 0 references and that would have 1. But you can see how we're using the same principles here for that. The class variables are much the same. Then the constructor, I think that's fairly similar to what it was before. The only thing I have done is instead of using this string, I did have it as type. I've now changed it to key to match the Pygame and Love2D, so that the key to the image name, whether it's shield or gun, it seems sensible because that is the key to the dictionary, to call the variable that holds that a key. So that's the only change there. Otherwise that's pretty much the same. Close power up. Shared, I've just briefly been through that. It's only got this public static bools play music. I think I've already shown you that. Shield is, again, it's a static class. I think I left it as static even in Pygame because we weren't really doing anything with variables, so there was no big problem. So these are all private statics, and because we're not referring to them outside the class, and it simply updates and then draws the shield, so no real changes there apart from a little bit of tidying up and perhaps the odd extra comments just to show you how it works. Right, so the main function now. So we've been through this new text input handler, which allows us to deal with the keys that are typed in by the player. Draw lives we went through before, no changes there. Process events, no changes there. The check collisions here, one change in it's not this one, it's not the mob bullet collisions, it's the mob player collisions. What we were doing here was if the player's lost all its, is no longer alive, it's lost all its lives, the death explosion has been played and the die sound of the player dying has also finished before we were changing the game state to quit. Now I've changed it to menu, so just that single change on one line completely alters the way the game runs. It now runs back to the menu and allows you to play that again. We haven't really changed anything on here, except of course that we're now checking for the power up list key rather than power up list type is shield or gun. Shoot we've been through. Update explosions, no real change there. Loading animations, no changes. No, there's no changes in those. Initialize, we've just added this, getting the text handler setting up. This one I will have commented out by the time this goes on to the repository, because this is only relevant for my monitor setup, and if you do it on a normal single screen monitor you won't see your window because it will appear somewhere in the middle of nowhere, so that will have been already commented out. Load content, don't think there's any changes there. I've got rid of this media player playing permanently. That will now only play when you toggle it from the menu. Update, we've added this menu update, but of course we're not actually doing anything with it. And finally the draw, again if we've got the menu game state there, we've just added this menu draw and then it puts up the word shmup, which I've already demonstrated. So that's it, we've got a menu system. All that remains now is next time and final episode is where we have a leaderboard which records and saves your high score and keeps that as in a text file. So we're nearly there.